This is Good Morning Uganda Extra.
A very good morning. Welcome to Good Morning Uganda Extra with me, Sharon Chomdisha. Thank you so much for always waking up with us and making sure that you watch throughout the day UBC TV. And yes, we do inspire Uganda. Now today we get to have a conversation about so many people that are making a difference in the country. Bugala Island from Kalangala district is one of the poorest islands with over 60,000 people. For employment or for them to be able to earn a living, they have always ventured into agriculture and fisheries. But now they've also had a lack of adequate infrastructure along the agriculture supply chain, such as safe, regular access to the mainland, reliable electricity, clean water, and promoting agriculture and fishing activities. That's where organizations like InfraCo Africa have come in to make a change at the island through their services. Today with me in studio is Mr. John Opondo, who is the Managing Director, Kalangala Infrastructure Services, as well as Ms. Pauline Among, Manager, Legal Services, UDC, and Board Director, KIS. A very good morning.
Good morning, Sharon.
Good morning, Sharon. Please introduce yourselves.
Good morning, viewers. I'm John Opondo, Managing Director, Kalangala Infrastructure Services. I'm happy to share my views with you this morning.
And my name is Pauline Among Ihumuza. I work at UDC as Manager Legal Services. I'm also a Board Director at Kalangala Infrastructure Services. Pleasure to be here this morning.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for coming through as well. Now we're talking about Kalangala Infrastructure Services. And we talked about the island that is the poorest with over 60,000 people living. Mr. Opondo, how did you find that island before you even started to think about solutions for these people?
Yeah, thank you, Sharon. Perhaps I want to start off by saying that when talking about Bugala Island, more accurately, it should be described as a formerly poor island, because as we speak now, it's one of the areas in the country with the highest per capita income, and thanks, part of that is actually due to the activities of Kalangala Infrastructure Services. How did we get to Bugala Island?
What was the situation?
Before that, Kalangala district, Bugala Island specifically, was categorized as the difficult to reach areas in the country. And that was because of the effort it required to get there, the amount of time, the risks to life and property in trying to get there. That has since changed when we introduced reliable ferry services, when we worked on the main island road. Before that, it was not unusual to spend a whole day covering a 67-kilometer road. Today, it takes anywhere between 45 minutes and 1 hour to cover that same distance that previously took about a full day. Mm-hmm. So yes, it was a poor place. It was a difficult to reach district, but that is now in the past.
Okay. What prompted you to start these services?
Way back between 2005 and 2007, the government of Uganda came up with the oil palm project through BIDICO, and the government committed to developing infrastructure. When we talk about developing infrastructure, there are a lot of things. You had the marine transport, you had the road, you had power, a whole lot of things. Now, that was a challenge for the government at the time. The government got into discussions with the Infraco Africa. Infraco Africa is a company that is funded by 5 European governments. So they got into a discussion, and then, yeah, that saw the coming on board of KIS. So to basically meet that obligation on the part of the government to provide infrastructure.
Ms. Pauline, what are some of the things that the company is mandated to do, KIS?
Well, KIS is a 4-component project, or company now, no longer project. The first arm of KIS is the provision of ferry services from Bugala Island to Luku, from Bukakata to Luku. The second component of KIS is the provision of clean piped water, potable water for the communities on the island and the businesses on the island. Then we have the 66-kilometer road on the main island, Bugala Island. And then finally, power services, both generation, transmission, and then the distribution of power on the island. So those are the 4 components of the KIS business. Yeah.
Have you been able to do that?
Oh yeah. All 4 components are actually working and operational. That was the mandate at the time of developing the project. And as we speak, today KIS is the national water of Kalangala, the main island, and then it is the Umeme of Kalangala. It is the UNRA of Kalangala, for lack of a better word, and then it's also the one that provides the ferry services, the alternative route to the government ferry, the one that comes through Entebbe. So on the KIS side, we have 2 ferries that ply Bukakata to Luku. All day, I think 15 routes? 16 routes a day, intervals of 30 minutes each. So it's the most reliable ferry service on the island. Yes. Okay. I think maybe to speak, it's catering mainly to address the needs of the business people and providing a normal life. Whenever you want to go to the island, you just have to arrive. The schedules are well known and well published, and then you set off 30 minutes and you're on the island for free.
Okay. Yeah. Mr. Opondo, how did KIS get the opportunity or the chance to be the one to do the UNRWA work, the Umeme, the national water, just like I'm quoting from Ms. Pauline?
Yeah, putting all this together required broadly 2 critical issues. One was the funds. The other one was the technical know-how. As you'll appreciate, the power that we are operating is a solar thermal hybrid, the only one of its nature in the country. The ferry services, they're fairly modern vessels. They're now really kind of the benchmark. So there was a requirement for funds. And we know that traditionally, it's the government that funds infrastructure.
Yes.
But in the case of KIS, we have a unique blend of government resources and private sector resources. So what brought KIS in the picture is that ability to mobilize private resources combined with public resources, and having the depth of skilled personnel to be able to pull all that off at the same time. So it would not be entirely correct to describe it as how did the KIS grab that opportunity. It's rather about the government being able to find somebody who is able to bring the funding, but also the technical know-how.
Okay. For how long have you been in existence?
KIS as a company was incorporated in 2007, but we had development activities and then the construction activities. And what you see as KIS today.
What do you mean developing activities?
As I've indicated, we needed to raise funds. It was necessary to demonstrate that operating ferries, supplying power, water, and the road was sustainable on the island. So a lot of work goes on in the background to demonstrate to funders that this is actually a viable opportunity. It is sustainable. So that is what we call development. So on the basis of that, we're providing that confirmation. You then use that to raise resources. So that is what we call the development activities. So after that, we then moved into construction. I want to point it out that the vessels that we are talking about, we constructed them. The power system.
From scratch? From
scratch. The power system, both the plant and the network, was all constructed by KIS. The same with the water and the same with the road. The road was originally a Dutch Maram road, which we then upgraded to Class B gravel, ready to receive.
More like an earth road. Maram Road would be a generous description because it was a narrow, your typical village road, and then suddenly it's upgraded, expanded, and built to a layer just before tarmac. So that's why it's described technically as a Class B gravel. And maybe to add, part of the development activities that John is referring to related to pursuing all the licenses that needed to be put in place for each of the components from the government side, from the developer side. He mentioned Infraco as being the lead developer at the time. PPPs were not very typical in Uganda, and therefore it was a proof of concept. So you come and say, if you give me these licenses, I can use my resources initially to start this. And then once I have proved to you that this works, then government gets to invest. So government provides a certain kind of environment. First of all, the commitment, the political commitment to do it, the regulatory framework to do it, the licensing and other frameworks. And I don't know how many licenses KIS had to pursue just to make sure that you're ticking the boxes for water development, for power development, for the road was fairly straightforward maybe, and then the water. So that was part of the development phase. And then all that put together to make sure that they are working, then you have a session of raising funds from both the private people and then from the government world, where, for example, UDC comes in as a co-funder or as one of the shareholders. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, actually, during that whole development stage, we had to put in place more than 45 agreements and licenses. Yes. So there's a lot of technical, legal background that goes into that. And that ran from about 2005 up to 2012. And during that entire period, you're not seeing anything on the ground. It's all paperwork. Wow. Money is getting spent, and
back and forth
movement. You need skillful manpower. So the development stage is a very critical stage in having this sort of things in place, and perhaps that explains why we don't have any other such a business or project in the country.
Yes. So are you just actually, now that you talk about it, but Kalangala is big and Black is one of them, or one of the islands on there. Do you have any others, or it's just specifically Bugala? Yes.
Yeah, presently we are only on Bugala Island. It's the largest of the 84 islands that forms Kalangala district. It has more than 50% of the people living in Kalangala Island.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, but certainly we'll be looking to extending services beyond Bugala Island.
Yes, now that you have so many things worked on. Okay. You talked about, Ms. Pauline talked about PPP. And I want us to throw a little bit of more light on that because it's sort of new when it comes to how we do work in Uganda. Yes.
Yeah, PPP may not be entirely new. For those who are not used to, PPP is private-public partnerships. We've had some of them in the roads, for example, the National Road Network, the Expressway is perhaps a PPP. But what makes Kalangala Infrastructure Services unique is that it's multi-sector. You're talking about a road, you're talking about marine transport, you're talking about water, you're talking about power.
Yes.
And as I've indicated, we had to get over 45 agreements and licenses in place. Now, what makes it a private-public partnership? It's kind of at two levels. One, on the ownership of Kalangala Infrastructure Services. UDC, Uganda Development Corporation, is a shareholder with about 46%. So from that angle already, you have the government of Uganda participating in ownership of this. Then we move on to the operational level. As earlier indicated by Pauline, the ferry service is free of charge to the user, paid for by the government of Uganda. And then we have the road. We brought funds, constructed the road, and then the government of Uganda is paying back over a period of time. So that is why we refer to it as a private-public partnership.
Okay. Do you think it's the most effective way to, one of the most effective ways in terms of service delivery?
It is a very effective way, especially when you look at the example of Kalangala. We've talked about four sectors: power, water, marine transport, and the road. So you have that whole skill set brought in from the private sector. The development stage took over 5 years with a lot of negotiations and all that. That could have perhaps been a bigger mountain if it was all left to the government. And then, of course, the funding. The initial funding that got KIS off was $50 million US. So you can see that we've been able to attract funding from the private sector. Traditionally, you won't find the private sector present in infrastructure. But this is something that we were able to pull off through innovative ways of working between the private sector and the government. So yes, it's a very effective way if you have to raise funds and if you have to put in place certain unique skills.
Ms. Pauline, anything
to add is that PPPs, to the extent that you're financing infrastructure services or major infrastructure works that require lots of capital to raise, and perhaps such works may not be the immediate priority of a government in terms of balancing their resources. PPPs can offer that platform to have a blend of both private capital and then government capital. So you get whether roads done, dams done. We have examples of PPPs in Uganda, or whether it is the likes of the Umeme concession or the likes of the Karuma Hydro. It can be an interesting way of financing big projects. So yes, there's value in using PPPs. Of course, they are longer in terms of materializing. They take a lot of time because of the nature of rigor, the level of expertise. If you're going to bring external capital in, then the kind of analysis of a project, the kind of appraisal, the kind of negotiations will usually be very painstaking. But in my personal view, I think it's worth the while because you get to work a lot with experts. No one is going to risk their money if, for example, the competence that is doing anything on the project is not credible, but it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of rigor. And it's because everyone is involved, private money is involved, government money is involved, the scrutiny is deeper.
Accountability.
Yes, there's higher levels of indeed transparency and accountability. So it can be an exciting way of financing major projects.
Would you actually suggest that it's a good option to be replicated in other sectors as well?
Well, it is, when you look at our needs basket, whether from an infrastructure perspective or otherwise, it's a model to work with to deliver several projects alongside other models. That's how I would consider it. So while you have conventional, maybe government financing or even private sector, involvement in different areas, for what has worked, I think, elsewhere when it comes to infrastructure, where you're pulling lots of resources, not just financial. Yeah. You're pulling financial resources, you're pulling capabilities, you're pulling technical know-how, you're pulling expert knowledge in areas that are a bit sophisticated, then PPPs can be a nice way to do it. Yes.
Perhaps another way of looking at it, where, say, you have limited government resources, the alternative would have been to borrow, but rather than borrow, you bring on board the private, partner who comes in to provide equity. So it's an alternative financing for infrastructure, and fairly innovative. Yeah.
Now, KIS as well, you have 3 business segments: power, electricity, water. How are you able to balance all these, looking at even the things that you're talking about being included in there, the technical know-hows, the experts in the construction and development stages? How are you able to balance these, and how do you even manage? Maybe Mr. Opondo, then Ms. Pauline.
Yeah, it's not a straightforward thing to be able to manage all those different sectors. But again, as we've attempted to explain, one of the advantages, the reasons in a private-public partnership is that you can then leverage on the private entity to be able to lend their experience from elsewhere. For example, when you look at KIS, one of the parent companies, the shareholders, is Infraco, the other one is UDC, who are involved already in a number of these sectors. So when you bring these parties together, you're then able to borrow from that skill pool, which you then bring down to KIS. So we're able to tap into what UDC has acquired on other projects. We're able to tap into what Infraco has done in other projects, not only Uganda, but across the continent. They're present across the continent. And the same with the other partners who come behind UDC and Infraco. So in a brief, how we've been able to put all this together is having that unique access to a pool of resources.
Okay. Ms. Pauline?
Perhaps to add would be the fact that, again, drawing from how the company, the owners are drawn. For the benefit of the audience, we have 4 shareholders in Kalangala Infrastructure Services. We have one of them, of course, is UDC, that owns 46%. We have Infraco, we have the IDC of South Africa. IDC is close to UDC, but in that jurisdiction. Then we have Electra. Electra being one of the developers also at inception of the project. So when you have all these partners on the table, you cannot fail to have a blend of competences brought. You have, for example, Infraco Africa and Electra are both UK companies. When it comes to things like governance and insistence on governance, they will have a standard and a benchmark. When you look at the IDC of South Africa, on the African continent, South Africa has grown their governance and codified what governance, ideal governance looks like. When you come to our own space, Uganda, UDC being a government entity, an accountable entity to the public and to the government for the resources that it has been entrusted with to invest, then that pool of investors will not permit for things to be done as usual. Because number one, you must return value for the money that you have invested. So you must have your governance right. The management systems must be right. You can't afford to have the company run, you know, in any particular order, because the levels of accountability are strictly high up there. So that's the advantage that these partnerships bring on the table. So I think John has been MD for the longest part of KIS, and growing a business from a startup to, I mean, a business that is not struggling is no mean feat when you're talking about you're talking about 4 components of the same business, and also at a startup phase, not a mature business that has its systems in place. So it has been possible, I'm sure, with a little bit of patience and working with teams and everything, it has been practical to actually manage it well.
On the issue of service delivery governance, yes, we understand, and the stakeholders, or the shareholders of KIS, you know, the role that they all play. But now when it goes to service delivery, and you still have electricity, power, water, or transportation, yes, how have you managed to be able to deliver all those at a go?
I will have John speak for that, but for the little that I know, yes, there is no company. Well, I think the levels of efficiency, the levels of excellence, the levels of I think accounting to the dot. You will never find a KIS ferry late. Standards of health and safety are at their highest, at least in the country. Provision of reliability of the KIS service, I think for the surveys that have been done in the past, are always rated high up there. Perhaps outside the island, people may not relate so much, but on the island where the services have been provided, I don't think there have been any issues. And to the best of our knowledge, and we can confirm that KIS has performed excellently well.
Mr. Opondo.
Yeah, you know, the bottom line is that yes, KIS is providing what ordinarily should be public service provided by the government, but in a different way, in the sense that you have in there equity, including private equity, and even the government component, the equity. There must be a return. Yes. Now, you're not going to have that return unless the business is profitable and sustainable. Now, how do you ensure that the business is profitable and sustainable? You must deliver on your service. You must provide reliable services. They must be safe. You know, you must be dependable. That is the bottom line. So the entire team, and entire team, I mean, you know, the staff, the other stakeholders like shareholders and funders and all that, are focused on ensuring that the company is sustainable, ensuring that it's profitable. And when you sit down, you can only deliver those if you ensure that the services are reliable, they are safe, and that sort of thing. So there's no room to to play around. And those are some of the other benefits of actually having a private-public partnership. In that service delivery is recognized as key. You're not doing anyone a favor when they use your ferry to cross over to the island. There's a lot at stake.
Very good.
You either do it well or you sink.
Yes. I'm curious to find out what the feedback has been from the people of Bugala Island. Yes, being able to, you talked about how we have 50% of people within Kalangala district living on Bugala Island, and all these things they needed, but maybe the government wasn't able to offer. You come in, you've played a huge role, there's a lot at stake, and you're delivering. What has been the feedback from these people?
Well, I think the feedback has been positive. Of course, we've carried out a couple of surveys, but it's also possible to get feedback without soliciting for it. And how do you get feedback without soliciting for it? You, for example, look at the developments in the area. Are people accepting to put their money in the district, or would they rather invest elsewhere? And from what we see, people are putting in money.
What do you mean people are putting in money? And who are these people? Are we talking about investors? Who are the people we're talking about?
10 years back, you would be hard-placed, for example, to find decent accommodation, whether it was a hotel or a residential house. Today, the picture is completely different. 10 years back, you had, it was an uphill task to try to get qualified people, whether a doctor, a teacher, an engineer, to be based on the island. Today it is different. So yes, I think the feedback we are getting is positive, both the tangible feedback, but also the feedback that is solicited. So we have no doubt that the people of the island, including visitors to the island, are very appreciative of the efforts.
Okay. Ms. Pauline?
I was amused when John talked about 10 years ago. I had the opportunity to go to Kalangala, I think when construction of some of the major components was going on. The road, I think when some of the way leaves were being compensated for the power lines to pass. And the picture then and now are two completely different perspectives. From indeed the type of houses, if in your own opening remarks you said Kalangala used to be one of the poorest parts of the country, it has translated today into one of the, the highest concentrations of income per capita, as John mentioned. And a lot of that, of course, is attributed to KIS. Part of it is attributed to the BIDCO, the palm oil project, because when you're farming and then you have a market, a reliable market, thanks to the government of Uganda, by all means your incomes are going to be stable and grow. But on the other hand, the role of KIS in the development of the island of Kalangala is a statement to behold. From the type of population to the type of facilities on the island, right from when you get off the ferry, drive through, you notice so many changes, whether in the kinds of accommodation people have put up, permanent structures with electricity, with, completely different horizon of what used to be known of Kalangala. Then we have all these hotels that have come up, big establishments. Recently, I think a week ago, we were there for a retreat on the board side. And the Friday evening, what we used to think is a quiet Kalangala, very sane. Suddenly, Friday night into Saturday was a huge happening place. And the influx of people onto the island was amazing. All that is testament to the confidence that It's a preferred destination. Why? If you have water, you have power, you have, good hotels coming up, you have world-class entertainment activities. It's something to behold.
Mr. Pondo, where do you see Bugala and other islands in Kalangala district in the next, let's even just give it 5 years?
Yeah, in the next 5 years, of course, Kalangala has already established itself right now as a preferred destination. Right now, we're seeing a lot of development in the areas of, private properties like homes. We are seeing on the tourism side, hotels. But in the next 5 years, what is likely to happen is that you're going to have that expanded. You'll likely be seeing Kalangala, particularly Bugala Island, being one of those places where, people set up, say, holiday homes. And very critically, what we're beginning to see now, which is going to accelerate, is, also an element of, planned sort of industrialization. We already have the fish farming, really growing fast, including an aqua fish project. Originally, all the
the ice.
Yes, the ice
plant.
project, ice plant. In the past, all food used to come from the mainland onto the island. But now today we're beginning to see actually natives in the outlying islands becoming big producers of food. So you're going to have Kalangala also as a source of food, including processing. So beyond the tourism that we are seeing now, beyond the oil palm, we expect to see food production and processing joining in. We expect to see some level of industrialization, courtesy of now the power and water. So that is where I see Kalangala in the next 5 years. It could actually take a little less time than that. Yeah.
Okay. Now, what advice or what would you say to the people who, after this, might even be interested, or we might get investors who are now thinking, I think I want to go and do business in Kalangala? What would you say to them?
Right now, when you talk about an island, the first thing that comes in somebody's mind is it must be some remote place and, developed and that kind of thing. But I want everyone to know that you actually have power, you have piped water, you have efficient transport, both on the island and also between the island and the mainland. And now, those 4 components are actually the ingredients that you need for development. So, Kalangala is a place that is ripe for investment. Kalangala is a place that is ripe for, for leisure, to just go and spend time with the family, have quiet moments. So, yes, people should know that Kalangala is a place where you can go to spend your money, where you can go to invest your money.
Any last remarks as we come to the end?
Well, from a UDC perspective, I would like to support what John says. UDC being an investment arm of government, or the business arm of government, really ours is to promote investment in areas that are maybe not attractive to private sector per se, but then have long-term returns, both financial and socio-economic. And it's part of why we went into the Kalangala business, because a typical private man would not put his money in an infrastructure project. But now that the ground is leveled, now that Kalangala is ripe for investment, it is to play a promotional role, come and actually take the power that has been put in Kalangala, come and utilize the resources that are in Kalangala by way of medium and big investments. There's plenty of land. There's plenty of, I think everything conducive in terms of investment climate is available in Kalangala today, thanks to the KIS infrastructure, and therefore to encourage those that might explore otherwise to get out of crowded areas like Kampala and wherever and go to Kalangala. They will not regret these decisions if made.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ms. Pauline. That was Ms. Pauline Among, Manager Legal Services UDC and Board Director KIS, with Mr. John Opondo, Managing Director Kalangala Infrastructure Services. Made a huge difference in one of the islands called Bugala Island, where actually the infrastructure, the water transportation, and they have ferries that go there. People there now have a better chance at having clean water, piped water, and so much is happening. A lot of development, all because of Kalangala Infrastructure Services. Thank you so much for watching. We'll take a short commercial break and we'll be back.